All right. So can we scroll down to the agenda, please? I'm a little delayed on getting my book up. All right, so if we can get a motion to approve the meeting agenda, please. If I can get someone to... Thank you, Steve.
Yeah.
Thank you, Patrick. Any contrary minded? Thank you. Any declarations of conflicts of interest? None. We will move forward. Item number 3, consent agenda. We have the draft minutes of the open session of the committee and any discussion on either of the items on the consent agenda? With none being forwarded, if I can get a motion. Thank you, Steve. Seconded by
Chris.
Chris. Thank you, Chris. Okay. The next item on our agenda is the... Sorry, Anna, can I get you to... I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time getting my book up here. What's the next item on the agenda, Anna?
We have one more item under the consent agenda, which is taken as read. And
yeah,
there's
so the consent agenda to me was passed or all the items. We're not doing them separately. Right. So unless if that was a misunderstanding, does anyone have any comments on either one of the items? Okay, so we will assume sort of the motion and the second to have been for both items, please.
Great. So the next item is the Rikai Center, which is item number 4.
All right. And is Michael going to be presenting that, or Meg, do you have any opening comments?
No, just we wanted to, as you know, every quarter we give you sort of a rundown of one of our current projects, and so we did the Innovation Center last time, and Michael is going to present to you the Rikai Center in West Don Lands that we've been working on for 10 years. So, Michael, over to you.
Thanks, Meg. Hi, everyone. I'm Michael Wolf. So just going to give a brief update on Rikai Centers, which is a proposal for long-term care home in the West Don Lands. And I think just before jumping into the slides, it's useful to mention that this proposal actually went to DRP yesterday for schematic design, where it received unanimous approval and quite a bit of praise from many of the panel members. I think that was a recognition both of the design they chose, but also that it fills a very important need in downtown Toronto. So getting into it, as you can see, here's a map of Block 5. It's in the West Don Lands, bordered by Front Street to the south, Eastern to the north, and Cherry on the west or the east. Next slide. Just a bit of background on the long-term care home situation in downtown Toronto. So over the next 5 years, there's going to be a reduction of between 1,200 and 1,800 long-term care beds. And in addition to that, due to COVID, the Ministry of Long-Term Care decreed that all of the older homes, which still had 4-bed wards, had to reduce to 2 beds. So there's quite a bit of pressure on long-term care downtown. There's already a significant wait list, and this is likely to get much worse unless a number of new centers are built. Next slide. So Rikai Centers is a nonprofit charitable organization. They own and operate 2 other long-term care homes in downtown Toronto. And we've been working with them since about 2010 to bring this facility to the West Don Lands. There's been quite a number of years spent discussing and trying to figure out a funding model that works for both Rikai and the province. And I think to reiterate the point that Chris made yesterday at DRP, the fact that this project is so close to approval and is at the point it is now is really a testament to both Meg and Leslie's determination, as well as Sue, CEO of Rikai Center, and the province in terms of a recognition that this is part of our vision for the West Don Lands, and that it really fills a growing and important need for both the waterfront and downtown Toronto. So we signed a DA with Rikai Centers in 2017, and they closed on the land with Infrastructure Ontario in January of 2020. Next slide. So the proposal is for a long-term care home with 348 beds. The last iteration involved options for homes and a condominium tower. They're no longer part of the project. So that proposal had about 220 to 260 beds. There's now, as I mentioned, it's now gone up by about 100 beds, which is quite a large long-term care home for a downtown area. This current iteration of the proposal has also been endorsed by a number of the local resident associations. And as I mentioned, we've always felt that it's both an important use and an exciting project for the West Don Lands. In terms of timeline, they presented to DRP for issues identification in 2017, and as I mentioned just yesterday, for schematic design. And they've submitted their preliminary project review to the city with a target for their site plan application this fall, as well as, and then construction starting, sorry for the typo, Q2 of 2021, and then below grade work end of 2021, above grade work beginning Q1 2022. And sorry, as Chris pointed out in the chat, DRP stands for our design review panel. Next slide, please. And just to reiterate this, so we did not transact the land with Rakai Senders, but we do have a development agreement with them, which obligates them to a number of our objectives, so such as the minimum green building requirements, to go through the design review panel process, to receive approval from us before submitting municipal approvals, as well as incorporating Beanfield as their broadband service provider, which helps us build out our digital inclusion program and neighborhood Wi-Fi. Next slide, please. This is just some context for the precinct itself. There's quite a bit of activity in this area. So here I've highlighted blocks 347, block 10, and block 8, all of which are at various stages of the approval process right now and have all been to the design review panel for detailed design in the past year and a half. Next slide, please. Here's an image of the existing site. This is looking southeast from Eastern and Cherry. And as you can see, it's a fairly long and narrow site. Next slide. And that's reflected here in the design. And I think one point that's interesting to reiterate that came up at the design review panel yesterday is that it's typically very difficult to design for long-term care homes because of all the requirements on the building and the fact that the rooms all have to be identical. So as you can see, they've kind of taken that monotonous room design and they've incorporated it into the overall design to create this kind of bookshelf look. So this received quite a bit of praise as well yesterday at DRP. Next slide, please. Yeah. And here's the cross section. I think what's important to point out here is that long-term care homes require quite a bit of amenity space. So you see that in the orange here. And also because it's such a small site, there isn't any space on the ground level for outdoor space. So they've incorporated that onto the 8th floor and the roof in the 2 gardens shown here. Next slide, please. Okay, and then just to finish up, there's a number of kind of interesting program elements. Just for sake of time, I'm not going to read all of these, but I think one of the interesting ones on this slide is that through their learnings from COVID, they've added 2 negative pressure isolation rooms to the proposal, so they can isolate those with COVID or other infectious diseases, as well as the placement of the garbage and laundry chutes to ensure the integrity of their isolation procedures. Next slide, please. They're also planning on creating a 9-station dialysis center in partnership with St. Mike's. They're going to have a 2-year specialized personal support worker program, which is the first in Ontario, in partnership with some of the colleges in the area, which hopefully will help the shortage of PSWs. And finally, they're going to create an assessment program at Rakai Centers itself to help triage both long-term care residents and seniors residents in the area before having to go to the ER, which is often the their first resort, even for minor illnesses, which places greater pressure on the ER, and is not the best way to care for some of the problems that they end up having. I think that's it. There's just a couple of renders here: Cherry Street looking north, and then another of Cherry Street looking south. So that's the end, and happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Steve. Steve Diamond has his hand up.
Oh.
Yeah, thanks. First of all, great presentation, Michael. Thanks. Hard to make these projects look good. So as I understand it, there are certain matters that they have to comply with it in terms of Waterfront Toronto, but Waterfront Toronto and George has no financial obligations towards the project.
That's correct.
Okay, and who owns the land?
It was owned by the province, so it was Infrastructure Ontario that we worked with. So the land transaction was with the province. I was actually at the province when we approved this, and one of the key things was the adaptability and modernization. The negative pressure rooms are going to be more and more in demand because we learned that actually during SARS. But the dialysis units right in the facility is fantastic, so you're not trucking people back and forth. And then, I don't know, Chris, if you have 30 seconds just on the design review panel comments yesterday, because I think they got an overwhelmingly positive comment on the design. But Chris, if 30 seconds.
Yeah, sure. As you know, our panel has pretty high standards, and sometimes projects, you know, have a lot of aspects of them critiqued. And I would say they really bought into this one pretty fully. I mean, I think they really appreciated the use and the fact that this was going to contribute to the mixed use aspect of the neighborhood. And they really liked the design. I think Michael did a good job of talking about the kind of design concept and how it tries to give some individuality to each of the units. I don't know if you could see from the rendering, but the brick walls, each brick wall by each unit has a unique brick pattern. So every one of them is slightly different. And the panel really liked the way the building related to Cherry Street and to the neighborhood. It really fits right in with the scale. They had a previous iteration with their development partner that required a tower, and it was quite a departure from the precinct plan, and I think raised a lot of concerns. So they were really happy to see this come in. It still exceeds what's in the precinct plan, but it's still very consistent with developments in the area. So they got a vote of full support very easily. The only comment they had was that the facade that faces Cherry Street doesn't seem very lively and animated. It's not Cherry Street, sorry, Front Street, which is kind of the main spine of the neighborhood, and they've asked them to try to add some more interesting uses at grade and maybe either add more windows or do something a little more interesting with the south facade. But other than that, they loved it. There was like, you know, there could have been a round of applause at the end, but there wasn't. And this was Montgomery Sizem, who's done a little bit of work on the waterfront, but not a lot. But they're quite familiar with these types of facilities, and the presentation was pretty flawless. Everyone was very impressed.
All right, thank you. So Maz, this was just for information. There's no decision on us.
Thank you very much, Michael and Chris. The next item that we have on the agenda is an update on Quayside. Meg, can I pass that over to you for your leadership on this piece, please?
Thanks, Maz. Actually, we have two sort of, I think, important things to bring to your attention. George is going to cover them both. One is about our fairness advisor, and the other one is our timeline. So, George, do you want to talk about that?
So on page 28 and 29, I think it goes through till 30, page 30. Page 30. You'll see the material. I hinted, but was unable to identify who our fairness commissioner was going to be because we hadn't signed the contract yet with her. So as most people should be familiar, Beverley McLachlin is a big coup for us. She was the former Chief Justice of Canada. I won't go into, you've got her background. She, has significant credibility in the judicial system, as you can see, just not nationally, internationally, and recently retired, and we were lucky enough to scoop her up. So as people may be aware, that there were some issues raised around the Fairness Commissioner in the past round. So I don't think there will be any issues raised. And I did let the Auditor General know that we'll be looking to confirm a new Fairness Commissioner, and I'll pass that on to her after I've notified you. So that's all I have to say. So I think we're Go ahead.
Doesn't she live in Vancouver or BC? Is that a problem?
I think she lives out west, but we have access to her. Everything's done remotely now, Jack, anyhow, right? So we just kind of pass the information through to her.
Oh, that's great. She'll be wonderful.
Yeah, no, we were very lucky. Good timing. And then just to go over one more time, I know I presented this at our previous meeting, but we're in the midst, we're just finalizing both community engagement. We've been engaging with a number of community groups bilaterally and just completed the market sounding. And we'll be having our stakeholder advisory committee meeting October 1st and continuing a public consultation through the month of October. That'll lead us again to IREC back in November, on November 19th. And then ultimately we want a board decision on December 10th with the intent of releasing the RFP later that month or at the beginning of January. And then targeting early spring for shortlist and then the selection of the successful bidder by the summer of 2021. So that's just to remind everybody of the time frame we're working to.
So George, it's Chris, if I may comment. I mean, I think we want to move quickly, but at the same time, I think the timelines are somewhat aggressive in terms of the release of the RFP, review of the RFP, and then selection of a proponent. I'm not saying we slow it down, but my concern, which you'll hear later on too, is it seems like the process is very much, directed, if you will, not necessarily by design, but towards the bigger players who can move quickly, who have a lot of funding, that can engage, teams of external consultants. And, I'm just wondering if that's an unintended consequence of moving quickly. Are we creating an outcome where we're really targeting, a handful or less of viable proponents?
Yeah, Chris, that's an issue that we're aware of. And, certainly my experience with Infrastructure Ontario, Metrolinx, that was an issue that came up there as well. I suggest let's talk about that. We have an in-camera session later. That's probably better suited to.
Okay, yeah, sorry. Yeah, you're right. Thank you.
So Matt, that's all I had, unless there are other questions.
Okay, I appreciate that. This was the last item of our open session. We're now going into a closed session. Can I get a motion to go into closed session?
Chris.
Jack. Okay, Chris. Thank you. Jack, if you're good to second.
Yes.
Thank you. Ina, if I could ask that we stop recording at this stage now, please. Chris. Thank you, everyone, for your participation. Thank you, management, for the depth of materials provided today.
Great meeting. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.